Okay, so this is part 2 of my URL shortening tutorial. So we're going to continue on. So as I was explaining, is our for loop is going to continuously loop through our character set, randomly selecting values until our code is, in this case, 5 characters long. So our for loop is going to consist of sort of 3 parameters, but they're not really parameters. I guess, for lack of a better word, they're going to be 3 conditions. So our first condition is going to set an initial variable that's going to be kind of our counter, if you will. So we're going to set our counter to 0. Then we want to say, while our counter variable, in this case I, is less than or equal to our length variable. Notice that I'm separating each of our conditions by a semicolon. If you do not do this, you will get errors in your program or your web page. And after that, we need to increment our counter variable by 1. You can simply do this by typing in our variable name and ++, or if you want plus equals 1 or plus equals itself +1. But ++ is simply easier to type. Then we want to put in a random variable that's going to randomly select select a number, and what we want to do is we want to, that's actually a function, we want to use a %, or mod, or modulus, which is essentially getting rid of a remainder while dividing. And if you don't understand that, then it's not really too important. So we want to say strlen, and since this is a function, we have to put in our character set, or our char set. So what this is doing is we're getting a number that's going to be a random position within here. So yeah, that's pretty much it. We're going to create a variable, and we're going to call it TMP for temporary, and this is going to equal sub_str, or substring. So we're going to select that single character at the position of our random variable within our char set. So we have our char set variable, then we have our rand variable, and then a 1. Now what this is doing, the substring function takes 3 parameters: the string you want to select a value or string from, the position that you want to start at, selecting values, and then the length that you want to select values. Now if you don't provide a length, it will select every single character from whatever position you start at to the very end of the string. So we always want to put in our 1 variable, which will allow us to generate a random key or code. After this, we want to put in our code variable, and we want to say dot equals, or append, or concatenate is the technical term, and that's going to add our temporary variable to the code. Now what we're going to do is we're going to say $query equals, actually we already have our query typed out. So we have our query, and inside of here we want to say select all from, and our database field or table is called items. We want to say where code equals $code. Now what this is doing is essentially this is going to allow us to see if our code is already in the database. Now obviously if our code is in the database, we don't want to use that code, we want to use a different one. So, not code, rows. So our numRows function is what allows us to do that. Inside of here we must pass along our query. Now you may be thinking, well, that'll loop through, that'll test it once, but what do we do in case that doesn't work? I mean, it's a very slim chance, but it's still possible. So to do this, what we're going to say is we're going to say put this inside of a while loop, and just for user preference, I'm going to index. Now inside of our while loop, what we're going to do is we're going to say numRows does not equal 0. Now, by default, a variable automatically equals 0 or null, in the, which is 0 or nothing. So we need to set our numbers variable initially, and we're going to set it to 1. So it's going to loop through and continuously loop through until we have a code that's not in our database. So after we have a code that's not in our database, what we're going to do is we're going to add all of our information to our database. But before we do that, since I did put in a date field in the database, we're going to create our date. Now I'm going to say capital F space lowercase d comma space capital Y, which is going to put this in the format of the month, in this case October, the day, in this case the 27th or 28th, I don't know, I'm just going to say 27th, comma, and then the year, which is 2010. So that's going to give us our date. Then we want to put in our query. Now we don't have to set this to a variable, and the reason being is because we're inserting and not selecting from, and I forgot my double quotation marks. So we want to say insert into items, values, and parentheses. So inside of these parentheses, we need to put in all of our items that we need, or all of our data pieces that we need to insert and add to our database. So since our first database field is ID, which is an auto increment, we just set this to nothing. Our second field is our code. And notice that I'm separating each of these by a comma. Our third variable is our URL, or our third field, sorry, and our last one is our date. So now this, in all likeliness, this will work as long as you've typed everything in properly, but there's still the off chance that for some reason it won't insert it into your database properly. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a query. And we're also going to use the numRows function, and what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to make sure that our information has been inserted into the database. So we want to say inside of our query, we want to say select star or asterisk or all from items where code equals, and this is going to be our code variable. Now that we've added it to our database, this should be equal to 1. So we're simply going to use the MySQL numRows. Make sure you spell everything correctly. So if this has been added to our database, then our numRows is going to equal 1. So if $numRows equals 1, which means if it has been added to the database, else we want to echo your info was not added. Now inside of our if statement here, we want to echo out our link that will allow the user to get his shortened URL. Now since I'm using a local host and I'm inside of multiple directories, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of this, which is essentially our web address, except for the add.php, because that is our page. We want to copy everything except our page, and we're going to put it in a variable, and in this case I'm going to call it site, and I'm going to set site equal to that. Now I'm going to get rid of the last / at the end of this to make it look a little bit nicer when we display it. So we're going to say here is your shortened URL, and for ease I'm going to put this in a text box, so input type equals text, and I'm going to set a value equal to, and this is going to be our site variable / and then our code variable. Now normally what we would do is we would set a page, say page .php $, oops, type that in wrong, PHP $, and maybe code equals, and then our code. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use HTACCESS to make it so we don't need all of that. All we need is our code variable. And that's one of the things I love about HTACCESS. Now, this box is going to be relatively small, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a size, and I'm just going to set it to 40, which is fairly large, and then that pretty much will take care of this. So, if I go back to our index page, and if I type in http:// and I'll just say basicnick.com, click shorten, your info was not added. Okay, so a problem has occurred where our information is not being added. And the reason is because I mixed up the information that goes into the database. What it is it's our URL first, and then we have our code. So if I simply refresh, and I'm going to actually hit cancel, and information has been added to the database now. So what I'm going to do, you can see it's being added, but in the improper order. Okay, so today is the 28th. What I'm going to do is I'm going to empty the table, and then I'm going to resubmit it, resend. So here's your shortened URL. So we have our link, and then we have our 5-character random code. If I refresh and resend the data, you can see we have a different random code every time, which is very, very handy. So if I copy this, open it in a new tab, you can see we have object not found, error 404. Because we have yet to create the page that's going to take this information and redirect to said page, which is what we're going to start on now. Now, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to create a new PHP file. I'm going to put in my PHP tags. I'm going to save it as, I guess, load.php. I don't know, for lack of a better name, it works. Then what we're going to do is we're going to put in a get variable, and this is going to be our code, equals $_get, and this is going to be a code value, and I'm going to echo the code. Now obviously this is still not going to work because we need to create our HTACCESS file that's going to allow this to work. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm just going to simply save this as .htaccess, HTACCESS. I'm going to hit enter, and if I look in my folder, since I'm not showing extensions in Windows, it simply shows up with no file name, which is perfectly fine, which means it's working. So in our HTACCESS file, what we need to do is, first of all, we want to make it so users can't view your HTACCESS file. So we want to say file space .htaccess, and then inside of here we want to say order allow comma deny, and there's no space in between those, and then after this we have end files. Now do note that file and files both, actually that should be files, they both are capital. And then I'm going to throw in a new line. What I'm going to do, I'm going to say option, it's actually options, this is not my S's, and then we want to say space plus capital F, whoops, follow, and then we want to say SYM, capital L, INC, or whoops, KS. So option follow sim links, and then we want to say capital R write. So rewrite with a capital R, and then with no space we want to say engine space capital ON. So we want to follow symlinks and set our rewrite engine to on. Now, since I'm running out of time and I don't have enough time to finish in this video, we will continue on in the next segment.